Sophia liked to tell people she left home because she wanted freedom. That was only half the truth. The other half was that she had never fit neatly into her family's life, not the way her younger brother did. Ethan was 12 years younger than her, too young to remember the nights Sophia came home late, too young to remember the shouting matches, too young to remember how their parents' patience wore thinner with each argument. Ethan was everything she wasn't. Polite, focused, loved by teachers and relatives alike, he excelled effortlessly, while Sophia struggled loudly. Where he obeyed, she questioned. Where he followed rules, she pushed until they cracked. Her parents loved her. She knew that. But love didn't stop disappointment from settling into their voices, so at 18, Sophia packed her things and left. No tearful goodbye, no promises to visit, just the sharp satisfaction of proving, mostly to herself, that she didn't need them. The studio apartment she found wasn't much, but it was hers. Small, cheap, quiet. Too quiet, most people said. The building sat right beside a cemetery, its iron gates visible from Sophia's bedroom window. Rows of headstones stretched out beneath old trees, their shadows long and still. Most tenants hated it, said it made them uneasy. Sophia didn't mind. The cemetery was peaceful. No traffic, no late-night noise. When she lay in bed, she slept better than she ever had back home. The apartment complex itself was half empty. Several studios sat dark and unrented, but one stood out. Apartment 13, directly beside hers. It had never been occupied. Sophia asked once, casually, and the landlord waved it off. "People are superstitious," he said. "Bad luck with the number." That was enough for her. Fewer neighbors meant fewer problems. For almost 3 years, apartment 13 stayed silent. Until one night, it didn't. It started with a sound Sophia almost ignored. A soft thud, like something heavy being set down carefully. She was exhausted from work, long hours, scanning groceries, dealing with customers who never looked her in the eye. She assumed she was imagining it. Then came another sound, dragging, slow, deliberate. It came from the wall she shared with apartment 13. Sophia sat up in bed listening. The noise stopped. "Great," she muttered. "Finally rented." But days passed, and she never saw anyone move in. No footsteps in the hallway. No voices. No lights beneath the door. Still, the sounds returned. Scraping. Bumping. Sometimes a rhythmic tapping, as if someone were knocking, but not on the door. On the wall itself. Sophia told herself she was stressed, overtired, overthinking. No one talked about apartment 13 because no one knew the whole truth. 20 years earlier, the building had been nearly full. Young tenants, college students, women living alone for the first time. Independent, hopeful, and unaware of how carefully they were being watched. The man's name was David. Back then, he was unremarkable, quiet, polite, the kind of neighbor people trusted because he never gave them a reason not to. He lived in apartment 13, and he learned quickly who was lonely, who was struggling, who needed to be seen. David had learned how to read people as a child. He grew up in a house ruled by fear. His stepfather's temper filled every room, every silence. The beatings were random and brutal, often triggered by nothing at all. His mother watched it happen. She cried. She apologized, but she never left. David learned 2 things early in life: that pain could be hidden behind closed doors, and that promises meant nothing. When he grew older, something inside him twisted. The anger he couldn't release toward his stepfather turned inward and then outward, toward women who reminded him of his mother's weakness, toward women who trusted easily, toward women who believed kindness was safety. He didn't take them by force. He invited them in. David was charming in small doses. He offered drinks, cooked meals, listened. He made them feel safe just long enough. He laced their food, their wine, their tea. When they lost consciousness, he did what he had been rehearsing in his mind for years. 5 young women disappeared. All lived alone. All had long, dark hair. All were slender, quiet, overlooked. Neighbors heard nothing. The building was old. Sounds traveled poorly, and when the smells began, David left town. He was never caught. He changed his name, his face, his weight, his voice. He crossed state lines and lived quietly, blending in. Married once, divorced quietly. No one ever connected him to the disappearances, but Apartment 13 remembered. The spirits remained trapped where they had last woken, confused, terrified, betrayed. Their bodies were gone, but their deaths were unfinished. No arrests, no justice, no one to speak their names aloud. They waited. When Sophia moved into Apartment 12, something shifted. David had returned to town months earlier under a different name. Older, thinner, grayer. He walked the streets like a stranger, but his memories knew every corner. And then he saw her. Sophia. Long black hair, thin frame, alone, angry, independent in the way the others had been. Something about her presence pulled at him like a reopened wound. He began watching. The spirits felt it immediately. They sensed the familiar hunger, the intention, the lie forming behind a polite smile. That was why the noises began. Why the walls bled memory. Why Apartment 13 refused to stay empty. The spirits weren't haunting Sophia because she was guilty. They were haunting her because she was next. They needed her awake, afraid, remembering. They needed her to see the danger they never escaped. And David, who thought he had outrun his past, was already circling back to finish what he started. Sophia noticed him because he didn't stare. Most men did. Too long, too openly, like they were measuring her or daring her to react. This one didn't. He waited his turn at her register, basket resting casually on his arm, eyes scanning the store as if he were lost in thought. When he finally looked at her, he smiled. It was easy, unforced, the kind of smile that felt practice without seeming fake. "Long shift?" he asked, setting his groceries down neatly. Sophia shrugged. "They're all long." He chuckled softly, like he understood exactly what she meant. "That's fair." He was older, mid-40s maybe, but well-kept. Kind eyes, hands that didn't shake when he passed her items across the scanner. There was nothing threatening about him. If anything, he looked like someone's favorite uncle. The kind of man people trusted without thinking about why. "You live around here?" he asked casually. "Yeah," Sophia said, already bracing for small talk she didn't want. "Me too," he replied. "Just moved back." Funny how places change, but somehow stay the same. Something about the way he said back made her pause. He paid in cash, thanked her by name. She hadn't realized he'd looked at her badge and wished her a quiet night. "Quiet's good," he added, almost thoughtfully. She watched him leave, unsure why a faint chill crept up her spine. He came back 2 days later. Then again the following week. Always polite, always brief, never crossing a line. He remembered things. Her schedule, her favorite energy drink, the fact that she lived near the cemetery. "Must be peaceful," he said one night. "People assume it's creepy, but quiet places usually are." Sophia found herself agreeing. He never flirted outright, never commented on her looks. He listened instead. Let her talk about customers, about exhaustion, about the freedom she thought she'd earned by leaving home. "Independence suits you," he said once. "You strike me as someone who doesn't like being told who to be." She smiled before she realized she was smiling. No one ever said things like that to her, not without judgment. "I'm David," he said one evening, as if it were an afterthought. She told him her name. From then on, he greeted her like an old friend. Ye. Weeks passed. Sophia began to look for him without admitting it to herself. His presence became familiar, comforting, predictable. He never stayed too long, never asked for anything, until one night he lingered. I'm cooking for one tonight, David said lightly. Too much food, as usual. Happens when you forget how to live with people. Sophia laughed. Story of my life. You're welcome to join me, he added gently. No pressure. Just dinner. She hesitated, then shrugged. Maybe another time. David smiled, unfazed. Another time, he echoed, as if it were already decided. As he walked away, the lights above her register flickered. In apartment 13, something slammed against the wall. Sophia didn't hear it, but the spirits did. And for the first time in years, they screamed, not in rage, but in warning. The first dream came a week later. She stood in a narrow room that wasn't hers. The walls were stained, peeling. The air felt thick, hard to breathe. Someone was crying, not loudly, but quietly, like they were trying not to be heard. Sophia woke with her heart racing. That morning, she found a bruise on her wrist, finger-shaped. The noises grew bolder. Something slammed against the wall one night, hard enough to rattle her dishes. Another time, she heard whispering, low, frantic, layered voices overlapping each other. She knocked on the landlord's door the next day. There's someone in 13, she said. His face went pale. That's not possible. That night, Sophia dreamed again. This time she saw flashes. A young woman pressed against the wall. Blood streaking the floor, a voice shouting angry, accusing. Words like liar and you promised echoing endlessly. Sophia woke screaming. Her phone buzzed. A missed call from her mother. She didn't call back. The cemetery began to change. During the day, the headstones seemed closer. At night, shadows stretched unnaturally long, reaching toward her window. She started closing the blinds, something she'd never done before. And still, apartment 13 grew louder. One night, she heard a knock. Not on the wall, on her door. 3 slow taps. Sophia stood frozen, staring at the handle. When she finally opened it, the hallway was empty. But apartment 13's door stood open. For the first time in years, darkness spilled from inside like something alive. Sophia stepped forward without realizing she was moving. The apartment smelled of rust and rot. The walls were scratched, as if someone had tried to claw their way out. In the center of the floor lay a dark stain that no amount of cleaning could remove. She saw it then, etched into the wall near the bedroom, names carved deep. Some crossed out, one left untouched. Sophia. She stumbled back, heart pounding. That night, the dreams stopped being dreams. She woke to the sound of breathing beside her bed. A woman stood there, her face bruised, eyes sunken with rage and grief. Her mouth opened, and dozens of voices spoke through her. "You're next," they whispered. Sophia tried to scream. Nothing came out. The fear jolted her awake. It has all been a dream, or so she thought. She got up, took a cold shower, and went to work. Sophia said yes, because she was tired. Tired of the dreams, tired of waking up with her heart racing, convinced she could hear movement through the walls. Tired of feeling watched in her own apartment. David's invitation felt dangerously normal. A distraction, something solid and real to ground herself in. She told herself that was all it was. David lived only a few blocks from the grocery store, in a quiet residential neighborhood where the houses sat far apart and the streetlights hummed softly. His home was modest but well kept. Warm light spilled from the windows. Wind chimes clinked gently on the porch. Nothing about the place felt wrong. Inside, the air smelled of herbs and roasted meat. The kitchen was clean, organized, no clutter, no strange photographs, no locked doors. It looked like the home of a man who had lived alone for a long time and learned how to make peace with it. "Wine?" David asked. Sophia hesitated, then nodded. "Just a little." He poured carefully, never letting the glass leave her sight. She noticed that, felt oddly reassured by it. They talked while he plated the food. About work. about how difficult it was to start over somewhere familiar yet changed. David listened closely, asked thoughtful questions, laughed in the right places. "You don't strike me as someone who scares easily," he said, as they sat down across from each other. Sophia forced a smile. "I used to think that too." She glanced at the plate in front of her. The food looked perfect. Too perfect. A flicker of unease crawled up her spine. David lifted his fork. Then, a sharp knock at the door. Both of them froze. David's expression changed. Not dramatically, not enough for Sophia to immediately understand. But something tightened. His eyes flicked toward the hallway. His fork hovered inches above the plate. The knock came again. Louder. "David Miller!" A voice called from the other side of the door. Sophia's heart dropped. David slowly set his fork down. "I'll get that," he said calmly, but he didn't stand. The knock came a third time, followed by the unmistakable sound of a police radio crackling. "Sir, open the door!" Sophia stood abruptly, chair scraping loudly against the floor. Her pulse thundered in her ears. "David, what's going on?" He looked at her then, and for the first time the warmth drained from his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I really did enjoy your company." The front door burst open. 2 officers stepped inside, hands resting near their holsters. A third followed, older, eyes sharp as they scanned the room, then landed on Sophia. "Miss, are you all right?" the older officer asked. She nodded numbly, unable to speak. The officer turned back to David. "David Miller," he said. "Or should I say David Rowe? You've been very hard to find." David exhaled slowly. Not angry, not panicked, resigned. "I knew," he said softly. "Eventually." They cuffed him without resistance. As he was led past Sophia, he leaned close enough that she could smell the faint trace of his cologne. "They never stop screaming," he whispered, "no matter how far you run." Sophia staggered back as the officers guided her outside. The night air felt colder than it should have been. Behind her, somewhere far away, apartment 13 went silent. For the first time since she moved in, the spirits were no longer screaming. They were finally being heard. That night, Sophia dreamed again. But it wasn't the same. There was no screaming through the walls, no dragging sounds, no cold pressing against her skin. She found herself standing in the cemetery outside her apartment, the headstones glowing faintly under a pale, unmoving moon. 5 figures stood before her. Young women. Whole. Unbroken. They didn't speak with their mouths. Their voices moved through her like a breath she'd been holding for years. "Thank you." Sophia felt it more than she heard it. Gratitude. Relief. The weight of waiting finally lifted. The cemetery faded. When Sophia woke, sunlight streamed through her window. For the first time since moving in, the room felt empty, not lonely, but cleared. The air was warm. Still. Apartment 13 was silent. The trial started. David Miller's arrest didn't come from a single mistake. It came from a series of small things that refused to stay buried. The first crack appeared months before Sophia ever met him. A construction crew had been hired to renovate an old storage unit outside town, one that hadn't been opened in decades. Beneath warped floorboards, workers found plastic-wrapped bundles sealed with tape so brittle it crumbled at the touch. Human remains. Not one set, several. The discovery triggered a quiet reopening of cold cases. Missing young women from 20 years ago, all last seen near the same apartment complex. At the time, investigators had assumed they'd run away. There were no signs of forced entry. No witnesses. No suspects. But technology had changed. Trace fibers found on the plastic matched carpeting from apartment 13 carpeting that had been removed years ago but never destroyed. A partial fingerprint surfaced on an inner layer of tape, degraded but usable. When run through updated databases, It returned a name that no longer officially existed: David Rowe. The trail didn't end there. A former neighbor came forward, an elderly woman who had lived across the hall 2 decades earlier. She spoke of strange smells, of late-night dragging noises, of a man who always smiled too much and never let anyone inside his apartment. "I thought I was imagining it," she said. "He was so polite." All 5 women had been poisoned before their deaths. Toxicology reports indicated the sedatives matched prescriptions David Rowe had once received for insomnia. The man had vanished shortly after the last disappearance, changed his name, altered his appearance, moved across state lines, but people always left pieces of themselves behind. When David returned to town under the name David Miller, he didn't realize how closely the past was watching him. A routine traffic stop flagged his license as suspicious. His social security number had discrepancies, tiny inconsistencies that triggered a deeper audit. Surveillance followed. His movements were mapped. Then came the final confirmation. DNA. A familial match appeared in a national database when a distant relative submitted a genealogy test. The odds were undeniable. David Miller wasn't new to town. He had simply come home. The police waited. They needed timing, opportunity, proof he hadn't just returned to visit, but to hunt. That was when they saw Sophia. They watched him approach her at the grocery store, not aggressively, patiently. Familiar patterns repeating themselves, dinner invitations, routine visits, a quiet rebuilding of trust. They waited until he invited her inside. Until history threatened to repeat itself. When officers knocked on his door that night, they weren't just stopping a crime, they were ending one. And somewhere, deep within the walls of apartment 13, the restless spirits finally felt something they hadn't known in 20 years. Not peace, but justice. David Miller. Born David Rowe sat expressionless as decades of lies were dismantled piece by piece. Forensic experts spoke. Victims' families testified. Evidence stacked until denial was no longer possible. He never confessed. He didn't need to. The verdict came swiftly, guilty on all counts, life imprisonment. As he was led away, David glanced back once, searching the gallery. Not for Sophia, but for something else. Something that had followed him for 20 years and finally let go. Sophia returned to the apartment. She packed her things within days, leaving the studio exactly as she'd found it. The landlord didn't ask questions when she broke the lease. Apartment 13 was sealed permanently, scheduled for demolition. Some places were better erased. She moved across town, into a small place with open windows and neighbors who laughed too loudly. It took time to sleep through the night again, but when she did, the dreams stayed quiet. One evening, after weeks of silence, Sophia picked up her phone. She stared at her mother's number, then she pressed call. When her mum answered, her voice was careful, hopeful, fragile. "Hi," Sophia said softly. "It's me." They talked for hours, about nothing important, about everything that mattered. For the first time, Sophia didn't feel like the black sheep. She felt like she had survived something and been changed by it. And sometimes, late at night, when the world was quiet, she thought she could hear a whisper carried on the air. Not a warning, not a threat, just gratitude. And then, nothing at all. Some places don't haunt you to harm you, only to be remembered. Thank you for staying until the end of this story. If it haunted you, moved you, or lingered in your thoughts longer than you expected, then this story has found its place. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more supernatural narratives like it, please consider subscribing to the channel. Don't forget to give a thumbs up. New stories will continue to unfold here, where restless spirits and unfinished lives still linger. Until next time, listen closely. The past has a way of whispering back.